department on today. This is honor, such a great organization. Really excited to be here today, or virtually be here today for our happy hour.
Right.
I got my beer ready to go, so cheers.
Cheers.
There we go. Oh, nice, the Pacifico. So yeah, thanks. Just a quick background on myself. So I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer of MSUITE. MSUITE produces BIM fabrication and field tracking software for modular as well as MEP builders. So think of logistics for constructions. Also was a co-founder of a company, ESUB Construction Software, which focused specifically on trade contractors, field data collection, really helping for the trade contractor be more efficient. And I sit on the board of directors of the Construction Progress Coalition and was one of the founding members of that, as well as COSA, which was the sort of the standards body that eventually merged into the Construction Progress Coalition. So just a quick background on some of the things that I've been working on over the last 10 plus years. But thanks again for having me, Cody. This is fun to have a virtual happy hour. I know we're not at in-person events anymore, but I thought, well, we can still have a beer together and talk shop.
Yeah, man, I love it. Yeah, that's awesome, and you know that's cool that you're a part of one of our sponsors, the CPC. Is there anything that you could expand a little bit real quickly on that, so our listeners could get a better understanding of one of our sponsors?
Yeah, sure. So Construction Progress Coalition is helping bring together the industry from a technology standpoint as well as an end user perspective for interoperability. So how do we make the tool sets that we have today from a software side and the end users today from a contractor side work together? So our goal is to create to certify common data environments. So ideas were integrations, and also push the industry as well as the technology providers on some of these integrations and how these systems can work together. And so if you've not taken a look or joined any of our events, it's a really great place to come and learn, just like the AEC Hackathon. So
awesome. That's great, man. Let's jump into it. So so personally, how did you get involved in construction technology early on in your career? Maybe like if you went to college or straight out of high school, you know, what was that? How'd that form? How'd you get in?
Yeah, no, I fell into it. I never actually thought I'd be in construction technology. I had studied entrepreneurship, and I was really big in mobile technology, and this is sort of pre-iOS. And I was in a startup, and we were working on image recognition through camera phones. I was always amazed by the sort of this mobile workforce, but this is still pre-iPhone. And I was trying to solve problems for sort of mass markets and how do we take this technology and apply it. And from there, I was working as a mobile consultant for some large businesses on how to use or what handsets and so forth. So I was looking at how do we solve these problems. And I had met Wendy Rogers, the CEO of ESUB, and she was looking at solving a problem for an industry she was really familiar with, which was the trade contractors, and she had worked with them for many years before. And I started digging into it, and I looked and my eyes just lit up. I was like, there's millions of these field users that are using technology every day, or they could be using technology every day, I should say. And it really got me excited about it. And that was 2007. And so ever since then, I mean, this has been really dedicated. I think every year that I peel back the onion of it, it gets more exciting because, I mean, we all know it's such a big market to disrupt, but when we walk around and we see all the buildings that are built, and knowing that your tool helped build that or how we can make that more efficient is really exciting. And then when you get to meet the people that are actually using the software and building the buildings, that's where it even got better for me. So like I'm in it for life now, and it doesn't mean that it just has to be trade contractors, though really at the end of the day I've really focused a lot on the people building the buildings, and that's what we've really found to be the trade contractors. So I've become really passionate about it. But that's some of the things as I got into it, I started to realize, unlike other industries, right, there wasn't a lot of mobile at the time, and this is 08. Some of the other things in 2011, I was like, man, there's really no interoperability. And I was grabbing coffee with James Benham, and we were chatting about it. We're going, why can't we push other people to start trying to integrate? And that's what became COSA. So these things are sort of fun as I got deeper and deeper into some of these problems that we saw in the industry. It's been fun working with other construction technologists, end users, however you want to call it, partners on there to move forward. And I feel like every year I dig deeper into this ecosystem where I had been very much focused on field data collection and project management back to accounting until Autodesk had invested in my last business and really started looking more at the design-driven and model-driven approach. And now with MSUITE, we're focused there. So it's just really exciting from getting into construction technology to now being really immersed in it. I would recommend to anyone that's trying to start a new business in this space, it's an amazing space. Just like with any other, there's always challenges, but there's a lot of problems to be solved. And there's still a huge market opportunity. We know there's a lot of different things going, but I mean, I'm hooked.
Right. Yeah, man. I can definitely relate to a lot of what you just said, man, and what you've been through in your career. Just to share a little bit of my background with how I got into construction technology. I actually started in architecture about 18 years ago out of college, and doing design, drafting, modeling. I'd already been using Revit since like before 2000, so and AutoCAD since I was a kid back in the 80s. So already had that connection, and architecture was I really thought that architecture was where I wanted to have my entire career at. And I was based up in Seattle at that time, in Redmond, actually right next to Microsoft and stuff. So it was cool, a good place to cut my teeth on learning how to put together construction documentation, entire sets, understanding drafting, the ins and outs. And then we moved down here to LA in 2007, and LA in the background, that's a live picture, guys, by the way. That's my office view, my home office view, I should say. And got the opportunity I was working with a few different architectural design companies, and I got my hands on, and I would say BIM is already sort of construction tech. Back then, it wasn't really construction tech because it was more the architects using it at that point. It was the few years before, in 2007, before really the contractors really started to see the opportunity and advancement in using BIM. But I got my hands on this cool thing that was called ARKit. And I was able to see, I was working for an architectural lighting design company, and I was able to show the architectural lighting products, the lamps, in a full 1-to-1 scale in my hand. I had a little marker on a piece of cardboard that was printed out, and then a webcam that was shooting, and I presented in front of an office presentation, like one of the weekly lunch ones, and I was like, hey, look, how cool is this? Typically the product manufacturers of the lamps bring out the products, these big lamps, and they only can bring 1 or 2 because they're so big. But look, you can see that scale, and we can flip through, and I flipped through like 10, 15 of them. And unfortunately, at that time, those guys they laughed me off the stage because they didn't see the opportunity. But that was like my first taste of AR in construction. I was like, oh man, there's something here, I got my first taste, and I really wanted to get into it more. And fast forward a few years later, I got the opportunity I started my own BIM services company, and I had already started the process of integrating with the different trades and creating construction models for them, and using construction coordination, 3D Clash and that kind of stuff. The different point layout and stuff like that. So I already started to drift that way. And I just saw such a bigger opportunity to be able to do cool things. There is more money in construction than architecture, especially for technology. The adoption rate is much higher in my experience. Not to say that there's not in architecture, not to downplay them, but then also with the trades, man. I got in with the trades started really working with the trades 7-8 years ago. And kind of like what you were saying, Benny, like once I got that interaction with those end users, and their passion and like them, or those are the guys that are boots on the ground, boots in the mud, that are actually going to be using these products and you know, out on the job site or just off the job site on a day in, day out basis. And the thing is if we're able to show them superhuman powers, like for me, mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, it makes them excel. It helps them excel at their job. You know, their day. It gives them a better career set of skills. And to see that passion, like they light up. You know, and there is something more to it than just being, oh yeah, doing construction tech. That's awesome. When you hit that end user, that's just super stoked, excited to see this new technology, and they just get it, and they're like, man, this is going to help me so much. And there's something about that that's just I don't know, man. What would you call it, Benny? I'm trying to think of the perfect word. It makes you feel good, for one.
Yeah, it's just that passion. I think it really ignites that passion when you're seeing how you're making someone's lives easier and how you're really changing. And some of the stuff is incremental and some of the stuff is 10x. But it's something we'll talk about, I think, as we go forward on the startup world and like people getting into it. One thing I'm always blown away about, though, is some of the things that you in your head or when you're developing it, are like, oh my God, this is going to be the killer thing. And there's this other thing you weren't even thinking about, but it's sort of in the product and you did, and the end user gets it and they're like, oh yeah, this is it. You're like, wait, what? I thought it was this other thing. And they're like, no. I mean, and so it's some of those things where it's like, don't overestimate or underestimate sometimes what's out there and sort of seeing the end user with it.
Right. And that's a great point also. When you're in startup and you're small and nimble, it's easy to quickly turn to make a 90-degree turn and reevaluate and find maybe a better use case, right? Or something that's actually more applicable, and you'll be able to create a core product around it or something like that. So that's a good point. You know, listen to your audience, listen to your end users. They're, you know, really the ones that are going to be able to help drive these tools that we're creating, right? You know, and as you're talking about startup and stuff, you know, a lot of our attendees here, if they've clicked in and are watching this now, they're probably interested in maybe starting up their own startup. Maybe they're hacking an idea over the hackathon, this hackathon or a future hackathon, as this will be in our video library. What would you tell those attendees out there listening? Where's a good place to start a new business? You know, how'd you do it? You know, what's is there a right way and a wrong way to do this?
There's not a right way or wrong way. You mean there's just maybe some guidance to help you learn, but you mean with anything, it's never easy. I mean, I think at the end of the day, one thing I've learned, it always looks shinier from the outside. Even in being in successful things, like everyone's really clawing at it, going at it, but to try to make some things easier is really, as we were talking about, focus on the market and focus on the problem you're trying to solve, and to make someone's life easier or to make that construction process go. Also, be narrow in what you're trying to solve at the beginning, and we'll talk a little bit. I'm a big believer in at the beginning, a minimal viable product, or MVP, and being able to test things quickly. So the idea, instead of sort of, you're not going to build everything overnight. I mean, if you're looking at Facebook, right, that's been there for 50 years, or not 50 years, yeah, not that's all I feel. But I mean, it takes time. So really focus, how am I solving someone's problem? Getting that user interaction early on, just because no matter how cool the technology is or how great not that you think it is, but you mean, right, that like, is it really helping someone in their job? And just because you go and the first time they're like, no, this thing sucks, don't give up. Just keep on going and iterating and understanding, well, is it something that's in the product? Do they understand how it should work? Am I really solving a problem? So it's one of those things where not ever, or very, very few people just go and like, oh yeah, I got it right, and everything's great, and now I'm scaling, and next thing I know, 10 years later, I'm public or I've sold the business. I mean, there's a lot of iterations. So I'd say really stay focused, start small, and listen to the customer. So if you're going on there, are some of the sort of the basic things, though. Determining on when you talk about entrepreneurship or you talk about business, you also want to look at what is the problem that you're solving for? There's not a right or wrong answer. So some are more lifestyle entrepreneurs. And what I mean by that, these are ones that are going to be less venture backed, probably due to the size of the market and the size of the problem. There's nothing wrong with that. There's not entrepreneurship path of raising money versus not raising money. Not a big deal either way, but just if you do want to do something that's going to be a publicly traded company and go raise all this money, and you look at it and you're solving a problem for only, let's say 100,000 people or something, that's probably not going to be big enough. Does that make a difference? No. So if you solve a problem for 100,000 people and you got a big chunk of that market, you would be just as successful as, say, someone going, but just understanding your pathway as you're going down there. And I think these things evolve over time, as you said. I mean, you're going to learn as you go through, and you're going to see these opportunities. So I think looking back, those are some of the things I would tell someone that's just going and starting a new business or going down the pathway of a new product.
Sure. Yeah. And you mentioned defining success. That is a big deal as an entrepreneur. Is what do you consider success? So some people think going and getting VC money is a big key indication of success, and then others are that lifestyle entrepreneur, as you mentioned, and maybe that it can always change and morph. Maybe you're the lifestyle entrepreneur, and you get to a point where it makes sense. There's some of the big companies, like for instance Procore. They were in business for 13 to 14 years before they actually went for their first round, which was I think back 2013 or 14, something like that. I don't quote me on the numbers, but now look at them.
Yep.
Big change, big shift, big difference. And they're a unicorn within the industry, and they're making big things. But that's the thing. Us as startup entrepreneurs, we now have opportunities to tap into like APIs, and work with their platforms. There's businesses within that business, right? There's opportunity within that opportunity. So just something for the listeners out there to think about. Like Benny said, just because you think you have the solution doesn't mean that it's the right answer, right? So what were some of the largest changes you ran into when you were growing your business?
Yeah, so I mean, I think when going through and scaling a business and running challenges, which then became changes on there, I think a big thing about that is just at different times, what were the right people and places. So right where you got that great product, you've got client market fit, you're ready to start selling it, but no one knows what you do, or you don't know how to explain it. And so I think there's not a specific challenge that was the one challenge, but what happens as you go through, just understanding where you're running into roadblocks and then figuring out how you can adapt to them and change your business or pivot, or not even, some people like to call it pivot, or you can even just say you mean adapt to there. So a lot of the stuff as you're going through, it changed really from time to time in that growth cycle. And they all seem just as hard when living in them, though, like looking retroactively, I don't know, they all seem very, very difficult when you're living in them. Then looking historically, it's not as bad. So there's always going to be new challenges as you go through. And I think the biggest thing is understanding your market is, I think, the biggest thing, because if you understand your market and you have a product that's going to help them and you have a way to explain to them that product, I think that's huge. I think as you get larger, understanding customer success and really working with your clients and sort of making sure that they're continuing to drive and adopt in there becomes much more important. And I think you sort of just get a little bit better, or you're better, and it's easy, I don't want to say easier, but adding new clients on that side and continuing to innovate, because then you have a lot of existing sort of feedback, other things. Though I guess that's the other difficult thing. So what you guys all have the benefit of is, if you look at Procore, if you look at Autodesk, if you look at ESUB, they've been around for a long time, right? And relatively. And so what everyone's always looking for is a way to disrupt that. And so that's sort of the other challenge as you get further into that growth. It's how do you stay relevant? How do you continue staying cutting edge on there? Because, right, you guys at this hackathon this week might have the next idea that can take on Autodesk or Procore or be bigger than both of them. And so that's, and not saying that you have to do that, right? As Cody was talking about, the other side of it could be just going ahead and hooking up to an existing API or building something on top of Forge and building a great business. I think I just realized that it says Cody for me. I was looking at that.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, that's my picture. Sorry.
Nice. That's fine. That's funny. We didn't catch that. So one of the things, Cody, Benny, this is Benny, by the way, Benny Baltrotsky. Yeah, I'm Cody, not AEC Hackathon Online. I'm representing them. So, as you were mentioning, like describing your business or what you do to like an end user or to someone else, maybe you're over drinking beers at a happy hour like we are, right? And like to me, that's, would you say that that's your elevator pitch? You have an elevator pitch, which is like a quick 2-minute description that you already, less than 2 minutes, hopefully a few sentences that you could define.
That's a big elevator.
What your product is. Yeah, they say 2 minutes, but yeah, exactly. It should really be just like 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
I mean, I think it's very important. The difficult part determining on who you're explaining it to. So it's having the elevator pitch for industry, and then having the elevator pitch for sort of sometimes everyone else. Because sometimes we're so far in the weeds of what we do sometimes, and some of the people that we're in I don't say an echo chamber, but like the people that can really understand the VR and AR, let's say, Cody, the stuff that you work on, versus the business owner who knows he wants to be in cutting edge technology and knows. So how do you have it? I mean, what they always say is that your like son or daughter or your grandma or your mother would be able to understand. So I think that's like a really important thing. It doesn't have to be super complicated on there, but right, you should be able to explain that to anyone. They'll be like, well, that's awesome. You're going to be able to visualize what they're building before they build it. Yeah. And it's like, okay, cool. I can understand that. Obviously though, if I'm talking to Cody, and Cody's a head of VDC at some large construction company or architect, right? Like probably want to go a little bit deeper than that. And so you might change that elevator pitch a little bit, knowing from there. But I think the importance is that immediate, like, oh, wow, that's cool. Or there's some interest, because that interest typically comes from you're solving a real pain. Though a lot of times we're just like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but.
Yeah, so it sounds like know your audience, right? Know who you're talking to, and admit, like, have something ready. Have an idea of what your pitch is, and it can change as you're talking to someone. But yeah, that's great, man. That's really helpful. I've been in very many situations where going to, like, in the past when we had events, in-person events, you get that chance a lot to describe what you're doing, and there's a bunch of different people, and if you're just meeting them, maybe have a little conversation with them if you have the time, unless it's like a big wig that that's really when you're trying to get somebody's attention, and that elevator pitch of 30 seconds to 45 seconds could be like the definition of you getting a deal or not a deal, or an opportunity. So that's something to think about as well as you define what you do.
And I think that's a really interesting point, because there's nothing better, and we can't do it now, but than these trade shows or some of these networking events, because you're just rapid firing doing that. Like, oh, I'm Benny, this is what I do. And it's interesting because you very quickly can gauge people's responses and that of like of interest or other things, and sort of continue refining what that talk track is. And that's the same as someone starting something or someone trying to scale something and go into a trade show, like understanding your audience and what problems we're really solving. And again, that's that thing we were talking about earlier, where it's like, just because you think it's a big problem, it probably is. I'm not saying it's not. Like, does your audience also think that? And this, the other thing that we talk a lot about as we sort of start scaling businesses is personas, and really understanding a persona driven. So a persona, for example, might be Joe, the VDC manager, and Joe, the VDC manager, what does he like to do? What type of tools does he use? And sort of understanding if I'm building him something, if I'm marketing to him, if I'm trying to educate or help Joe, what does that look like? In Sally, the executive, is very different. She had, right? Even though it's the same product I'm selling or the same product I'm building, the benefit to Sally, the executive, is different than the VDC manager, right? If I told Sally about, not always, but sometimes, right, about some of the different things maybe in the BIM department it will do versus the enterprise reporting that it could give her, she might not be as inclined.
Right. Yeah, that's, as you were mentioning the, being at the trade shows and stuff, it's also a big key indicator of your passion of what you're building. Are you passionate about it? And that will most likely show through in those initial conversations. And when you bump into somebody else that has that same passion or something that hits on like your solution, because your solution not necessarily is a solution like Benny was saying for everyone else, or it's not a challenge that everyone else has, because we're teams of teams to build a building, and we all have different challenges, but the overall challenge is to build this project, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And once I will say, passion is a big deal to me. And then for when I talk to other individuals in the industry, such as Benny, man, like when I first met Benny, he was very passionate about ESUB and very passionate about the industry, and it shined through to me, and like instantly his charisma, like, it hooked me in. I was like, man, this guy knows what he's doing. He's passionate about what he's doing. I'm not necessarily, maybe I'm working at a in a specific trade that this could assist, but my day in, day out, it didn't affect what I was doing. But I was like, you know what, I'm interested. This is, so again, it goes along with the, you got to sell yourself as you sell your solution, because people in the industry are, very much so are going to choose a solution if they have the opportunity to interface with a certain personality that they prefer, that they like, and they can connect with. They'll even pay more money if they feel that the connection and partnership business, doing business with that specific individual or that team is worth it. So that I think that all sort of bundles in with exactly what you were talking about, Benny. So for someone that's hiring sales and marketing, early sales and marketing, do you have any suggestions for them? Where should they be looking? Who should they be looking for? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, so let's think about this. Great, we did such a great idea. We had our hackathon. We found our client market fit. We got our first 10 customers, 50 customers, whatever it is, right? So before bringing on any more salespeople, the founder really should be able to sell it himself or herself, right? It's one of these things where if you can't, someone from a sales background isn't always that's not just going to solve your problems. Though marketing, I think I'm a big believer in education. And so even though that is marketing, but trying to educate the market, especially if you have a new technology, just sometimes it's a devil and a curse, right? That you have the new technology. So I'm looking for early on the marketing side, I think someone that's very flexible, that's going to be able to be a little bit more of a jack of all trades on there, determining on who you're selling to. So if you're selling to large enterprises, that might have a little bit more of account-based marketing expertise versus someone who is sort of more of a mass market B2B sort of like consumer $5 a credit card swipe versus someone selling something that could cost $500,000. So that's going to be the same thing on the sales side, is understand what you're selling and what your market looks like. So just because they were, I don't know, I'm trying to use an example here and not like offend or, well, let's just say even though they're the top sales rep at Procore selling $100,000 plus deals, and you're selling a widget for $1,000 to a lot more people, or vice versa, those are different skill sets. So who you're selling to and what type of transaction, because right, if you're selling that $500,000 deal, well, have people that know how to walk the walk, talk the walk in there. And this is only after you've proved the way to get there. So if you're at that point, hiring for those phases, those are some of the things. And culture is always everything to me, to be honest. I mean, those are somewhat secondary, and being able to coach someone is much more important. And I'd also say, I always think that sometimes we overestimate industry experience from a sales side, not from a technical specialist. If someone's smart and is a sponge and wants to learn more about this industry and move it forward, they don't have to always have those chops. Though, not gonna lie, we were just bringing on new salespeople at MSUITE, and we brought on a lot of people from industry just because it was much quicker to get them up to speed on pain and sort of what the market, and they knew a lot of the people in the market. So not saying that it's the wrong way to go, but it's something that historically I've maybe made a mistake. No, I don't want to say made a mistake, but overcompensated for.
But overcompensated in the fact that it was they had more sales experience.
No, that they needed industry. Like when I first was starting with ESUB and hiring people, it's like, oh my god, if they don't know these people in and out, like, and it really is a mix and a match with it. I mean, one size doesn't fit all. But I gotta say, culture and people are very important. Everyone's different,
Very
but
important.
like, you gotta work with someone every day, and
right.
other people have to work with them. So
yeah, no, that's a good point too, because just because you're building something, you know, a solution or whatever it is, it doesn't mean that just because you're building it, it will sell, right? It goes to the culture, you know, of the business, of the company, right, and the people, you know, and the relationships, right? It's a big part of doing business, you know.
And it doesn't, sadly, none of the products sell themselves completely, right? I mean, you can have the best mousetrap out there, so, but if you can't explain it properly and show that value, and you don't have people, and people don't know about your product, right? They're just not going to be purchasing it. And so that's a lot of the stuff as you start going. But what I've found in all of the businesses that I've been a part of is that the market really pulls you to that first $1 million in recurring revenue. It doesn't have to be that mark, but I mean, people are coming and buying from the founder or the first couple salespeople, right? Where you're not going, and not saying that there's been a lot of businesses that have struggled in that early stage, and they find their niche and they just hit it like a rocket ship. So as we talked about, there's a lot of these companies that have been around for many years before raising money, so or growing rapidly. I mean, one that I always look at from the outside, I think, is Buildertrend. I think has over 500 employees. It's to the residential space, but I don't think they really raised any outside capital. And you mean, right, they sell to a part of the market that, right, people are like, wait, residential home builders, and they need technology too. So it doesn't have to always be the super sexy, or I mean, that could be sexy too to some people, but I mean, it's there's not I'm getting at is there's not a right or wrong thing on who you're building for, but if to be successful, you just need to make sure you're solving a problem for someone.
Right. Yeah. You know, and that leads into a good the next question, I think, would be as you're talking about this builder, I think you said Buildertrend that has a large amount of employees, and it sounds like they bootstrap for the most part. But you know, that's not always the best solution for everyone out there. You know, if you want to move very quickly, it probably is gonna take some, you know, some cash to get there. You know, maybe some VC money or other types of, you know, angel funding, whatever. So when somebody is looking to raise maybe their first round of outside capital, do you have any suggestions for these type of people that are looking for this?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think the first thing is, do you really need it? Like, right, is this like, as you're saying, maybe this is a bad analogy, but I think of it like taking steroids at points, determining, but there's a couple things like, do I need this money to help build the product to get the revenue? That's going to be harder to do, right, pre-revenue. And a lot of that stuff is probably going to come more from angels or friends and family. And you have to be very focused at that. So when you're going to, you're right, we found client market fit, we sold it ourselves as the founder, right, the product, we hired our first couple of sales and marketing people. Well, this thing is moving along, right? We're going, now this might be a good time if you wanted to accelerate it. And what I'm getting at though is money does not solve problems. So if you had a problem before and you just get money and you throw people at it and you hadn't figured it out, you might be able to figure it out quicker, but a lot of times you can't. And so what I'd say is make sure you're ready for it. I mean, and that's why I think sometimes it's super annoying when going out there because people are like, hey, you need revenue. And you're like, well, if I had all this revenue, I wouldn't need all this money. But there is a reason why is that, I mean, if they're investing, they're helping in scaling. So all I would say though is when you are at that point, understand that different investors, be it venture capitalists or angel groups, or corporate venture like Autodesk invested in eSub and Stanley Ventures just invested in MSUITE, right? They have different needs, or they have different profiles that they look at. So for example, if you're looking to raise $500,000 in a seed round and you go to a large VC that only writes check for $10 million, great, they might take a meeting with you and talk to you, but it's not the right time. So really do your research around them for what you're looking for and what are those groups interested in. So are they into B2B? Are they into construction tech? What is their check size? I'm not saying it has to be, and use your network, right? Determining on and asking around, getting in front of people. But right, sometimes I hear people and they're like, well, I just got this great idea, I'm going to go, and then they're talking to someone who typically writes $10 to $50 million checks. It's great to go get feedback and go learn from them. But I'm saying from the idea of connecting on actually raising, sort of if you can find venture capitalists or angel groups or whatever level you're at that fit what you're doing, and then also talking to a lot of people though too. And the nice thing though is if you do get those meetings with some of these people that are later stage, not a bad thing. Always ask them though, who should I be talking to within your network? What other groups would you recommend? And you'd be amazed because they might love the idea and they love the technology, but you're just too early for them. But their buddy down the street invests exactly in your market, and he's been looking for a company just like that. So that would be something I would sort of suggest if you're going out looking for that first round of capital. One is, do you really need it? What is it going to be used for? And then, just the same way the investors are looking at you, start profiling the investors to which ones you think would be a good fit for you.
For sure. Yeah. Even like I'd even throw in the personalities as well, the company culture, because they're companies as well, right, that are investing in other companies. So does your profile fit their profile, like as you were calling it, profile? When you go in and that first gut feeling, your initial gut feeling, do they make you feel good? Because they're doing all this stuff as they talk to you as well. They've just done it on a larger scale with many more companies, right? Hopefully they have, depending on what stage they're at. So it's, I would say from experience, even you go with the, if someone's not making you feel that comfortable, maybe it's not the right fit, you definitely, because it's going to be a relationship over a long run, right?
And I think that's a really good point, Cody, because when you look at this, before, if this is your first round, it's been you and your co-founder, and it's just like you do what you want to do, you go. Now all of a sudden there's typically a board of directors, there's other people asking, there's different things. So there's a lot of nuances as you get to that. And if someone on the webinar today or someone seeing this says, hey, I have some questions around that, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and try to find some time, because I think when you get to that point, there are some things to think about, because, right, if someone's asking for more control of the business or more board seats, and as Cody's saying, you got to work with these people too. It's not the same as your coworker that you're seeing every day, but it's no longer you and your co-founder. It expands. But I've actually been fortunate to have some really great boards and good people that add value, and that sort of help you expand as a business and as a professional. Though I have heard the horror stories as well, where it's just, maybe didn't bring in the right people that we really should have. But I think I hear less of that, though. When you do hear it, it's much louder, and I think that's pretty typical, right? When someone gets maybe a short end of a stick, they're sometimes louder about it.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and that's all part of the experience, right? I would also throw it in there. You know, these the investors or whatever kind of outside capital, or even if it's inside capital, where you're working at another company or whatever, if they're not willing to work with you and answer questions and stuff, you know, that's if they're trying to stonewall you, that's, you know, which I've seen quite a bit myself. That's something that you want to take into consideration. You know, I would say don't back down if it's something that's important. And that's the thing. A lot of the times, especially with new startups and new entrepreneurs, the generations that have been there before will try to take advantage of these up and coming aspiring entrepreneurs. So again, gut check. You know, just make sure that you're comfortable with whatever you're getting yourself into. I think. Would you agree with that, Benny?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think when getting to that point, because it's always like the shiny object, but if you know what you're getting yourself into, you're confident that this is going to help you achieve those goals that you've set forth for the organization and for helping the industry move forward, then it's good. But yeah, just sort of get that gut check as you're going through. But I think these things all, by kicking and screaming and working really, really hard, all come naturally now.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, man. Well, you've been in this industry the construction tech industry for over a decade, man. And you know, what's the change that you've seen over, like, let's say the last 5 years in the Contech industry?
Yeah, it's really crazy. So getting in right around the downturn originally in '07 into this focus just my technology efforts on construction. The things that I've really seen turning around 15 is adoption. All right, so we've seen more adoption. We've also seen obviously more venture capital in the space, but this lead to a more design-driven construction has been the other thing that I've been seeing more about, and hence one of the reasons why I was so passionate and moved to MSUITE to help them scale with their mission, because we're seeing a lot of the 2010 to 2015 technologies were much more around just automating some of these sort of basic, and not all of them, I'm generalizing, but some of the bigger ones, like automating processes that we are already doing. Now we're starting to see the ability for technology to help disrupt the process and really drive results where it's not just the automation. So we're seeing more adoption over the last 5 years, as we were talking about. So I think there's just a lot more ability for that next generation, because when we talk about 10x or even these sort of larger leaps forward, I believe that there needs to be a platform, and not that like a forge or not like a single platform, but the idea that the consumer base knows what a technology stack is and has software that has APIs and things like this, or literally own tablets. And so these are some of the things that we're starting to see that happen. And Cody and I were just talking a little before we got on about the iPhone 12 Pro, right? It's got LiDAR in it and 5G, where before, to get LiDAR in a consumer's hands, that changes it now, right? And now everyone 5 years ago might have been, like, there's a lot of apps out there in 2015, but they weren't maybe using them as much. Now it's very common if they're using a plan grid or something in the field, they're starting to get there. So now all of a sudden these ideas of these converging ideas of, hey, yeah, I'm used to using an app, and now, well, I can get that model down or that information down much quicker because it's in 5G. And maybe it's not just Tango where, I don't know, a couple thousand people have developer devices, and then maybe, I don't even know, 500,000 bought the devices. Now, hundreds of millions of people will have LiDAR on their phone and 5G capability.
Exactly.
So, and now if there's millions of individual workers out there, let's say in the construction industry, and let's say 40% of them, so now you have used technology or a smart app before, and that's going low. So now let's say you now have millions of people that know technology, that then have hardware, and the infrastructure is there. And so that right there should mean that there's probably some better solutions to what we're doing today around those things, but that's what will make it possible. I don't know. I've been on this big thing since watching that Magic Leap documentary. A couple months ago, and if you've seen it, it's a great one. You can rent it on Amazon, but it's about the spinoff from Apple. They pretty much invented the iPhone before there was a wireless network. So AT&T was trying to do a closed network, and then but the people went on to actually invent the iPhone, the iPod, the Nest, Android, eBay, you name it, right? Like all these people, but it was just interesting because you're looking at this thing where the technology and the people weren't ready for it, and it wasn't quite there. It wasn't that the idea was wrong. And so that's what I'm seeing the largest change over the last 5 years, sort of tying back to what you were originally asking, is that the platform for disruption and innovation is riper than ever. So now it's just for everyone out there to find what those tools are and how we're going to help this industry move forward. Because I mean, I'm looking at all the beautiful tall buildings behind you, and I mean, this stuff isn't going away. Well,
yeah, I actually use some of this technology on these two buildings and a few other buildings in my view over here. Virtual reality to see the built environment before it's built. Definitely BIM, 100% on both the US Bank Tower, the Wilshire Grand, multiple other buildings in the sky, and then even mixed reality. Even, recently, there's a lot of construction projects. I look down the road here, you can't really see it, but down on the ground, there's a few projects that I've been working with mixed reality, because that's becoming a bigger opportunity. And again, going back to, this device that everyone has in their pocket, now, right off the bat, there will probably be some early adopters to, be first in line, such as myself, to get one of the new iPhone 12 Pros with LiDAR on board. I was one of the first guys to get the Tango back in, I think it was 2015. We actually had Tango as a sponsor for quite a few years there. They would bring boxes of Tangos, tablets, the white ones, to our hackathons, and they would have a hack challenge, and teams would come together and develop for that. So, but the thing is that the iPhone, I'm not going to say the same sensor array, but very similar sensor array in a way. Obviously, the iPhone's going to have newer sensors, better sensors. But the thing is that some of those ideas, like that I was working on hacking on, and those other teams are hacking on, as Tango went away, because Tango was trying to, get integrated in consumer devices. Unfortunately, it hit a point that it didn't have that the consumer adoption rate that Apple's going to have, man, because Apple is not forcing in every phone, but for those that want to go big with big boy, the 12 Pro, they're going to get it. It's going to, snowball down, and then most devices are going to have it soon.
That's what I'm getting. So it's going to snowball.
Apple trend, man. Yeah. And then going back to your that documentary we were talking about, General Magic, which I believe it's on YouTube. General Magic. Not to be confused with Magic Leap, which is another mixed reality device. So General Magic, great documentary. I always get it mixed up myself, man. With Leap Motion, General Magic, Magic Leap. There's too much magic in this world, and with the titles. So that's another thing. As we kind of just got onto this, don't if you're starting a business and you're branding your business, another good point, as this just kind of came up. Do yourself a favor and come up with a brand, a logo, a name that's not like everyone else in the industry, because it's going to get confusing. We get confused. We're getting confused here on this chat. So something to take into consideration. But yeah, no, I'm excited about that, because like as I'm on to, I guess I'm like one of those early adopters and see like the opportunity with like some of this new technology, and I get really excited about that, and I'm kind of known in the industry to be that guy, bring out some POCs early on and say, look what we could do, or this would be cool. But with that, when you talk about adoption rate with like some of the companies out there, like one of our sponsors, StructionSite, 360 cameras came out, and they're relatively new. They were new like 2016, let's say, right? I remember going to some tech expos in downtown LA here, and seeing the 360 camera and being like, oh man, what could that do? That would be really cool if you could see something with that. Yeah, you can get this reality capture. And then Matt Daly and Philip Lorenzo came together and started a StructionSite. and blew my mind with, hey, well, look, we can orient and take multiple photos with these 360 cameras and show where that photo is on a plan, and that's good enough for people that are working on it to be able to get a quick reality capture instead of going out and doing a point cloud or regular pictures. But they're able to, get a photosphere of what's going on. And then the next iteration was that it's a video streaming walking through, and they're using features to lock it into the right location when it's on the plan, which and then on to like other cool stuff, which that I'll leave that up to them to give in a presentation coming soon. So definitely check out their presentation when it comes out. But the reason why I brought them up is that 360 camera was like sub $500, which makes it very
I had my
attainable.
Theta 360 and I was loving it. I didn't know.
Yep.
And it was, though I lost it, so I don't know where it is, but had some amazing pictures with it, not for work stuff, but just, fun little piece of technology.
Yeah, I know. And like I got it for work, but then I used it like on my Europe trip, and I used it on just random cool things, blow people's minds. Excuse me, sharing 360 photos on social media, and it's so like inexpensive, and it's less expensive now for a better technology like the Insta360, right? So then that adoption rate, like just real quick, I'll finish up with this slide. So if you're tying it to the device that everybody has, here's the brain. And you have this, like $99 device, $200 device that's taken this 360 photo now / video. The opportunity for that adoption is way more. A bigger user base has that opportunity to jump on board. The smaller companies with less budget are going to be able to jump on board and use this technology and use this brand Structure Site. Or one of the other companies, other solutions that are out there as well. But that's something to think about as you're developing. Instead of going after a $75,000 LiDAR scanner, right? That can do reality capture really well, but it's $75,000. That's really expensive, and it takes a long time to do. So, anyways, just getting in that mindset as you're building up your solution. That's something to think about.
I think it's really important, and keeping it simple. Just keeping it simple is so important. But if you look at the plan grid in the iPad, right? Look at that timing. You could say Structure Site in the 360 camera, or there's a lot of other sort of 360, and then who are the people are we going to be sitting here 3-4 years ago being like, oh my God, LiDAR, when that really started becoming mainstream, those people were at this hackathon and they crushed it. And now and so that's, I think there's really something there. Not saying it has to be in that space, but when you look at the convergence of technology, there's a lot of times, I live in Southern California, I live in San Diego. And so a lot of times I just think of surfing like entrepreneurship, because I don't know if you've ever surfed before or been in the water, but if you imagine if you're paddling and the wave is way far behind you and you're just paddling, that's not going to pick you up, right? You got this great idea. Though in this perfect instance, when you're catching the wave and going, right, it's right at that right timing. But if you wait too long and you're paddling, you don't get on the wave and it goes past you, right? And so you're starting a company too late within something. So this seems to be probably the right time for those types of technologies where it's just starting to happen. And again, there's so many things that blow my mind every day in the sense of like, it doesn't need to be in that timing. Look at the types of industries and types of things that have been disrupted, that if someone told me 6 months ago that would be disruptive, like, no, like that's like so-and-so just does that. That's like, how could you take on so-and-so? And so don't feel like it has to be in there, but it is sort of interesting when you look at some of those other, at least in the construction tech space, the convergence of technology adoption, hardware, and software.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking, as that wave, you're a good example of maybe, no offense, paddling a little too soon, just based on from our conversations you sharing with me about ESUB and being in there at 2007, 2008, when the economic downturn hit, and you have that experience from paddling too soon. One of the things is funding, how are you going to have enough of your paddle strength to keep on paddling as that wave approaches if you're too early?
We were lucky and realized that we were too early, and we bootstrapped it. So we said no, because if we probably took on money and you're too early, you just burn through it, because right, the investors want you to grow or do things, and if you can't push against a boulder if that market isn't ready for you. And so it is something that we were fortunate to actually not raise and realize that the market wasn't ready for us, though we said, hey, we're willing to continue driving this along because we know there's going to be something there event, like we know it's going to. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But yeah, ideally, you don't have to do any of that, and you can just sort of right into the sunset.
That's awesome, man. So you had enough paying customers to keep you your stamina going for
ramen profitable. Yeah, right.
There you go. Ramen profitable. That's definitely the thing. You know, in that going in, you know, from you were there 2007, 2008, and speaking of economic downturn, what, you know, something we're right in, you know, I wouldn't even say the middle of right now. We're at the beginning of something for sure. Is it going to be the same? Probably not. But is it going to be a blip on the map? More than likely, right? So, you know, what are your thoughts from previous experience in economic climates like this, if you will, and the adoption rate of technology within the AEC industry?
Yeah. So I mean, guys, this is unprecedented, and it actually, though, is a huge opportunity. So if you look, and this was what I started to study when COVID first hit, is people's behavior is going to change. No matter what, if that's from social behavior to business behavior to, I mean, we're having a happy hour over Zoom, right? And so I know I might have to go back, see if the bartender's coming around. So these behaviors are going to change. So this is going to create actually one of the largest opportunities. It's going to fast forward technology adoption. Some things will die off, some things will move faster, and we've already started to see that. I mean, right, if you look at something as simple as Zoom, right? And not simple in the sense of the technology, but the idea of, yes, now more people are on Zoom. So I think that no one has a crystal ball on what it's really going to do to the economy. But if you looked at the US construction between 07 and 09, it was something like $1 trillion to $600 billion. So it was a huge cutoff on there, but still there's a lot of construction. And I'm a big believer that even if there are going to be some things there, there's a large stimulus for infrastructure and construction that we haven't seen. But really, even without any of that, the most important thing right now is behaviors are changing. And so this opportunity, something that might have taken 5 years, might now only take 2 years or a year. We're seeing fast forwards in technology adoption like we've not seen prior, because before people could get away with it. And so people now are, I mean, their mindsets are changing. So I think this is, no one knows what's going to be on the other side, if it's a W-shaped economy or a V or a U. But one thing I think I can say with confidence is that people's behaviors and consumer ideas will change coming out of this. And I think it's for the better in the sense from an adoption standpoint. And I also think whenever these things happen, these are actually when huge opportunities arise, when things aren't the status quo.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, if you had one of those opportunities before this hit, you know, some of my friends, some of the again, I'll use these guys not to keep on calling them out, but give them love. You know, Struction Site. They, you know, I think they. I know they were bootstrapping around 2017, starting maybe publicly announced in 2018, something like that, right? So, you know, like you said, Benny, nobody knew this was going to happen. We didn't know how we were going to react to it, especially with technology, the interaction, being able to have that remote access to the job sites now at the touch of the device that's in your pocket, wherever you're at, is very powerful, you know. And I know that they're seeing a big, you know, uptick in sales, and, you know, and that's not coming from them. They any of these 360 cameras and any of this remote work stuff, like even Microsoft Office, Zoom, like you mentioned, they're seeing big uptick because there's now this need, there's this challenge of, okay, we have to do remote work, you know, and everybody I'm saying, you know, saying the obvious here, but it's something to think about, you know, is what you're working on, is it going to solve you know, like Damon always says, what going into a hackathon, is it going to solve a Monday morning problem? So is your solution, what you're working on, your hack, your challenge, is it going to solve a Monday morning problem coming up next week, right? And I know that we're pretty far into the hackathon already, like what, a week and a half in, but that's something to keep in mind as you move forward. There's a very big challenge right now, and that challenge is remote work. And just because it wasn't already built up doesn't mean it can't be built up, because the thing is just that this is definitely going to put a crater in the way that we work for probably the rest of our lives. And who knows, we you know, we don't know when we're going back to the normal or the new normal, you know, when that actually happens. Not to get too far into that rabbit hole, but it's something to think about. Like, this is a big impact on the industry we're in, construction technology, and it's not too late to come up with a solution, or if there's something you're already thinking about, maybe that's an opportunity to pivot. So did you have anything else to add onto that last question about the last 5 years? I think that you covered it pretty well, actually.
Yeah, no, I think it's just for everyone at the hackathon, this is awesome that you guys are participating in these things, and it doesn't have to be a new startup. Like, I'm going to talk some about some things I've been reading, but a lot of intrapreneurship. So it's this, and that's the idea of entrepreneurship within a larger organization. And we see DeWalt with Stanley X doing that, or just, it doesn't have to be at that scale. But what I'm getting at is, don't feel that this disruption or entrepreneurship has to happen in the next startup and be the next PlanGrid or whatever it might be out there. So these same ideas that we're talking about are the same if you're in a $1 billion or $100 million or smaller construction group and you're helping them to innovate. And so it's very similar things, just your audience is a little bit different. Or if you're creating something for a consumer, but that's you're already have an existing company. So a lot of the same ideas. So don't feel like you have to go that way either, right? It doesn't have to be the next publicly traded company. It doesn't have to be a standalone startup. These same ideas work internally within your own organization as well, if that's what your focus is.
That's a great point. Yeah, there's many different ways, like you pointed out, to especially in today, to get a start, to get that funding to be able to build something. But then again, I'd say just be very aware of the route you're taking, right? Know what the end goals are as your, or mid-range goals are as you're getting yourself into that. So you mentioned some reading material or some resources. Do you have any specific books or audiobooks that you'd like to recommend to the listeners?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Audible or reading anywhere you go, it's always good to sort of take some of these books. I'm always looking at these, but one, The Lean Startup. It's a really great book on just sort of MVP, a minimal viable product, and how to test and create, as well as it talks about entrepreneurship from an internal business or like intrapreneurship, as well as entrepreneurship, and a lot of great principles. That's definitely one, if you haven't read, I definitely would like to, or I'd say take a look at. One that came up when you were talking that I just have been thinking about is Crossing the Chasm. So this idea of going from early adopter, and that sort of idea of like, and I learned this in my first thing where we had 5 PhDs and they all had these cell phones with image recognition technology in 2005. And I'm like, well, they're so early on the early adopter. I'm like, no one else has these tools yet. And how to go through there. So Crossing the Chasm, I think, is a good fundamental one. And then I don't know if, I think this is more for scale, but it's actually for everyone, the essentialism, the discipline and pursuit of less. So one thing that gets so hard as an entrepreneur is there's so many, I call them shiny objects, or so many things you could do, or so many great ideas, but how do you do less? How do you only focus on the things that are going to make you more successful? Or one of the things, and I think it's from the Essentialism book, I've read a few of these, but it's the idea of what's the one thing I can do today that's going to make everything else I have to do easier. So if you're into some of those things, because it's so hard, right? There's so many great ideas, there's so many prospects, and so, or so many different opportunities we have. So the essentialist one, I think, is a fun one. I like the idea of the pursuit of less.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, I agree with those shiny balls. I like to call them shiny balls of yarn. That young kitten, and there's a ball of yarn over here. Oh, there's a ball of yarn over here, right? Go play with it for as long as possible until you see the next one. So, okay, that's awesome, man. Is there any? Did you have any resources, or what? How do you typically digest this information? Are you sitting there and opening a book and reading it, or are you working and listening to Audible in the background?
So I'm more Audible. I mean, I got some of the books if I want to go back in and take some notes on, but I love Audible, though. I sort of miss my commute now that I'm 100% remote, because that was like my downtime for it. So now I almost have to schedule Audible time, or if there's some just sort of mindless work going on. But no, Audible's great. And just, yeah, now it is sort of crazy now with Amazon. It's like, oh, I hear about this book, click, immediately have it, or get it shipped to my house the next day. But I'd say I'm definitely more on the Audible side for sure.
Nice, awesome, man. Well, this has been great. Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up here?
No, just thanks so much for having me on. This is something that I've spent a lot of my life focusing on, and just really excited to be able to share some of my experience and with such an amazing group. And what you guys are doing at the hackathon has just been amazing. I've been following what you guys have been doing since the beginning, and just really appreciate it, because this is where these great ideas come from. I know there's so many that have come from here, and if it doesn't come out of this one, this hackathon here, the next project you work on. And so this is an honor to be a part of it. And Cody, it's always good to catch up with you. So hopefully next time we can do it in person, but until then, the virtual happy hours is, I think, what we got.
Definitely, man. Cheers to that. It's been great to catch up with you. Definitely take a sip. And with that, man, Benny, you did an amazing job. I feel like I'm ready to jump head into my next startup. Just with some of those points that you were making, it definitely your passion shined through. You definitely got me excited. You kept me going. So hopefully the attendees and the future attendees watching this will really see that as well. So thanks again, Benny.